Disney's live-action remake of Pinocchio is not the worst of the lot, but it does miss the point of the original movie more than any of the other Disney remakes that I have seen. Pinocchio is not a hard story to understand, and the 1940 Disney version even less so. Based on the 1883 Italian fairy tale, the basic concept is that Geppetto, an elderly woodcutter, crafts a puppet and wishes for him to come to life. The blue fairy appears and does grant him life, stopping short of making him a real boy. For that to happen, Pinocchio must grow a conscience. The original film and the book it was based on was a morality tale. Here's how they work. Pinocchio is presented with a choice. He could either go to school or follow on his jaunt to become famous. He could have fun on Pleasure Island, or he could abstain from things like cigars or beer. And most famously, he could abstain from lying. Because he was still a kid, and quite a bit gullible, he would often partake in these temptations, and he would suffer the consequences for doing so. The more memorable instances were turning into a donkey and his nose growing. It's a basic formula. Pinocchio is tempted with a bad thing, he does a bad thing, and he suffers the consequences for doing a bad thing. With that in mind, how do you screw this up this badly? So, of all of the Disney remakes released so far, Pinocchio was most doomed to fail. And that's for more reason than there just being a bunch of other adaptations of the fairy tale released in a couple of years' time for no apparent reason. The original Pinocchio was dark. Very dark. It wasn't the Hunchback of Notre Dame, but of all the films in the canon, it's probably the second darkest. Much of the imagery is still with us today. Kids in this drink beer, smoke cigars, turn into donkeys, and then they don't ever get better. The villains like Stromboli or Monstro are dark and sinister and menacing. It doesn't hold a candle to the book where Pinocchio literally kills Jimny Cricket, but it's dark enough to go against Disney Co.'s family-friendly brand image of the modern day, in numerous ways. Remember when I said the formula? Pinocchio is tempted with a bad, he does a bad, and then some bad things happen. Well, it is against modern day branding to have our protagonist do something bad ever. A protagonist with questionable morality isn't good for profitability after all. And so, how do I want to put this? In the 1940s Pinocchio, the character was very much portrayed as a real boy. It was definitely of the time, written to be more precocious than children really are, but there was an edge of humanity to him. He had flaws, and those flaws often got him into trouble. Pinocchio in 2022 is a big block of wood. He often gets tempted with the bad things, and being the good little squeaky clean Disney-branded individual he is, whenever he is presented with temptation, he refuses. He decides to ignore Honest John and go to school. He tries to avoid going to Pleasure Island, and then avoids drinking a root beer while there. And yes, we'll talk about the root beer thing later. This presents a whole host of problems when the movie wants to keep the story largely the same as the 1940s version, and these problems destroy the entire point of the film. So let's rework that formula for a modern day audience. In 2022's Pinocchio, Pinocchio is tempted with a bad thing. He avoids doing said bad thing, and then he gets the consequences of doing a bad thing anyway. I know that complaining that a movie gives out bad lessons to kids this day and age is passé, but the fairy tale was written to literally do that. Even ignoring that, Disney's Pinocchio is about the title character growing a conscience, as in learning right from wrong. What exactly is the point here if he knows the difference between right and wrong from the outset? There's a sort of story here, but there's no theme. There's no grand idea that ties it all together. And so what we have here is an innocent boy who has all sorts of fucked up things happen to him through no fault of his own. In a way, this film is much more disturbing than the original just because of that fact. Although that might be because of the god-awful CGI. This is just a minor nitpick, but CGI Jimny Cricket is the worst design in all of history, and the fish makes me long for Shark Tale, which was animated better. On this morality track, there are a couple of scenes that people have a lot of problems with. We'll start with the nose-growing moment. When Pinocchio lies, his nose grows. That is the most famous aspect of the 1940s Disney version. It's been subjected to several parodies, most famously Shrek, in which it was used as a utility. The 2022 Pinocchio does what happened in the parody, which breaks my brain. In order to get the key to Pinocchio's cage, he intentionally lies to Jimny to make his nose grow and get him out of the cage. So what's the problem here? I mean, beyond the fact that it misses the point of the work harder than a 2010s internet reviewer. Lying is generally not a good thing. That is why Pinocchio's nose grows. It is the consequence for him doing something bad. But in this scene, Pinocchio does something bad and gets consequences that turn out to be for his advantage. Then again, this movie seems to be very okay with lying in general. There's a newly added character to this film, Fabiana. She is one of the few friendly people that Pinocchio meets, despite working for Stromboli. Pinocchio is nervous to talk with anyone who is not a puppet or his father, so she basically uses her skills to make Pinocchio think that her puppet, that he apparently has a crush on, is real. and she uses this to get Pinocchio to do things. It comes across as like an old-timey version of catfishing, and it's really gross. The other big point of contention is Pleasure Island. In the original film, the boys who went to Pleasure Island did things like smoked and drank alcohol. It was clearly delinquent behavior that society as a whole didn't want kids to be doing. Because Disney doesn't have any fucking balls today, beer was replaced with root beer in this version. And yes, you can make a version of root beer that has alcohol. It's not something that most people are going to pick up on. Hell, most brands of root beer that you can buy don't even have caffeine. In the original, Pleasure Island was a place that kids were definitely not supposed to be. I'm gonna be honest, Pleasure Island from the 2022 version looks like Disneyland. And that's a great slogan, isn't it? Come to Disneyland, turn into a jackass. The Disneyification of Pleasure Island ruins the scene completely. It turns the bad thing Pinocchio should not be doing from things that are, if not illegal for minors to do, definitely discouraged, to eating a lot of candy. There is a shop that is specifically made for shoplifting, and another building specifically for destroying clocks. But because those buildings are specifically made for it, it comes across as a purpose-built amusement attraction. To put it this way, it's immoral to shoot someone, unless you're playing the game of paintball. It's immoral to break clocks, unless that's the point of the game. The Disneyification ruins the comedy too. When Lampwick started changing into a donkey, Pinocchio gets rid of his cigar and beer, giving a disgusted look. This doesn't work if it's root beer, unless this is some kind of parody like Kids Next Door, which it's not. In the original, the kids were changed because they underage smoke and drank. It communicates that kids should not be doing that. In the 2022 version, the kids changed because they ate candy, rode on a roller coaster, and drank root beer. And also they did some protesting? What the fuck? Yeah, some kids turn into donkeys because they were protesting, which gives some very concerning mixed messages considering the entire point of Pleasure Island. I guess they also changed because they played billiards, which is the only thing they kept between both versions. But billiards was in the 1940s version because back then it was seen as strictly a gambling game that adults didn't want minors playing. In 2022, billiards is an all-ages game. Like most rec halls and kids' arcades have billiard tables these days. It doesn't help the movie's case. It's one of the things that should have been adapted for a modern audience. All of this hurts the movie on a deeper level as well. In the original, the guy who ran Pleasure Island had the role of a boogeyman or a Krampus figure. The kids did something naughty and were punished in a supernatural way. And in a fairy tale world, he was allowed to get away. The 2022 version has the stipendium here being the same Krampus-like figure, punishing the kids for once again having fun at Disney World. But in this version, he is not punished for what he does. Stromboli gets punished, sort of, and Monstro presumably dies, but every other villain gets away scot-free. By sanding off the rough edges, they've ironically made this a crueler, more miserable film. It's one that keeps punishing an innocent character while, for the most part, letting those who do bad go free without reproach. Also, what makes Jimny Cricket literally have no point in the entire film? He doesn't need to be here, because in this version he does nothing. He affects the plot in not a single way. If you've never seen the original or even heard the most basic thing about it, Jimny Cricket was appointed as Pinocchio's conscience. He told the boy to go to school, stay at Pleasure Island, and generally helped guide him to better himself. In this version, Pinocchio does not need a conscience. So, for all of it, we have this awful-looking green snot alien in a top hat just coming along for the ride, spewing the most badly wannabe genie try-hard comedy while contributing less than nothing of substance. The one thing he does here that you could argue is plot relevant is grab the key from Stromboli's. There's two issues here. With the worst superpower in the world, Pinocchio could have done it himself. The other issue is with Fabiana. I don't like Fabiana as a character. She contributes next to nothing to the film. So, in the original film, the Blue Fairy came to Pinocchio when he was caught by Stromboli, and she was also the one who sent a dove to tell Pinocchio that Geppetto had gone out looking for him, before he got ate by Monstro. The 2022 version takes the Blue Fairy's role and breaks it up into 3 pieces. In this version, the Blue Fairy pops Pinocchio to life, sings to the ceiling for no reason, and then fucks off for the entire film, because 2 other characters that didn't need to be here basically cannibalized her role. The seagull is pointless. Fabiana is pointless. They couldn't even have her steal the key to make her semi-relevant. No, she just tries to save Pinocchio and fails. Then she just randomly shows up towards the end, says Stromboli's in jail, invites Pinocchio to come with her, and then fucks off. The seagull, Sophia, literally takes the place of a plot device. And thus, that is all Sophia is. A plot device. Speaking of the Blue Fairy, that brings us to the Elephant in the room, I guess. In the original, she was a white character. In this one, she was recast as a black woman. There will be plenty of time in the future to talk about Disney's race swapping. But let me tell you objectively what happened in Pinocchio 2022. The company took one role and gave it to a black actress. Then, they diminished that role to be as small as possible, by splitting that role up into 3 pieces, giving one of those roles to another person of color and a white woman. The only other actor of color who plays a character of prominence is Keegan-Michael Key, who plays the fox, Honest John, and is not actually on set. I also managed to notice that the only Italian actor who was cast in this film adaptation of the most significant Italian fairy tale was the actor for Stromboli, the only villain who was shown to get any consequences whatsoever, and was definitely not shown to be appealing in any way whatsoever. Meanwhile, in the role of Geppetto, they cast Tom Hanks, who can't keep a consistent Italian accent to save his life.
An almost real boy! Look at you! Look at you!
So I guess it's not about acting ability over ethnicity either. I have no idea why they cast Tom Hanks. No wait, I know. Let me guess. It's because he was in Castaway, and they needed someone with experience of floating on a piece of debris. Totally worth him not even trying to sing in an accent. Disney lost Buzz Lightyear, kept Woody, and both times lost on that bet. I also want to say that this movie is really stupid. My favorite moment of the entire film is when Geppetto says that he can't sell his clocks because he made them for his son who had passed away. And then when they ring, we see that they're all Disney merchandise, because that is not tone deaf in the slightest way whatsoever. I'm sure that Geppetto's dead son would have really loved Roger Rabbit, a film that wouldn't be out for a century after his death. The dialogue is also similarly hilarious.
Because Pleasure Island will be the most life-altering experience you will ever have. You won't be a puppet anymore.
Yeah, the place is gonna totally let you make an ass of yourself. Get it? They're specifically breaking clocks on Pleasure Island because Geppetto makes clocks, and this isn't super forced at all because, you know, most kids don't have a problem with the concept of clocks. It's not like dirty dishes or something.
We need a simple, strong stage name. I've got it. Chris Pine!
You think that anyone in 80 years is gonna know who Chris Pine is? I bet you don't know who Chris Pine is now. The 1940s one wasn't making puns about Dick Jones. The ending, though. The ending is the best part of the movie, because Pinocchio becomes a motorboat. Yes, really. He becomes a motorboat. And then Monstro, the giant whale thing in this version, has an evil laugh for no reason. This version also has horse droppings for no reason. There was no horse droppings in the original movie. Trust me, I checked. Yes, Pinocchio, play with the horse shit. And give the fox the apple that was right by the horse shit. And then Geppetto fake dies. Because what would a Disney movie be without a fake death? I mean, in the original version, Pinocchio did actually die. And yes, it was him and not Geppetto, because the movie was about Pinocchio, and the Blue Fairy revived him because his sacrifice proved he had a conscience and became a real boy. In this version, Pinocchio doesn't become a real boy. Maybe. They keep it vague because the people who made this film have never seen Pinocchio. I have no idea what the point of any of this was. Like all of the other Disney remakes, I at least understand to some degree. With Beauty and the Beast and The Lion King, they wanted to show some at-the-time groundbreaking CGI. With Mulan, they wanted to at least capitalize on a message. And at the very least, it tries a new genre that it is totally incompetent at. Aladdin was at least a famous movie, but Pinocchio? Not only is it one of the more obscure Disney films, being one from when Walt was alive that's not a princess film, but it's also one of the more dark ones. And it doesn't have the nostalgic connections that any of the other Disney remakes have, excepting maybe The Jungle Book. And honestly, with this remake, that's probably what bites me the most. Lion King, Aladdin, Mulan, even Alice in Wonderland. I'd imagine that it's very likely that people have at least seen the original versions of those. Most of the Disney remakes have been of post-Renaissance films. There's a good chance that most people today have seen the original. Many of them, like The Lion King, still play in theaters sometimes. But because Pinocchio is so old, this may be a lot of people's first introduction to Disney's Pinocchio. And that is a fucking crime, because it holds up really well. It is probably my favorite of the films that Walt made during his lifetime. Not just because it has an edge that most other films don't, but because it's beautiful. And well, it allows a character to do bad things, and suffer the consequences for doing it, which is something that we've entirely abandoned in children's media, even though works that are quite Dalian, like Charlie the Chocolate Factory, are actually important for children's development. See the original sometimes. I don't think you'll regret it. It's definitely better than this one at any rate. So what are we reviewing next?
Pinocchio.
Wait, didn't I just review that?
Bye.